For those of you who are not aware, I reviewed Metroid Prime 3. This time, however, I think it's time I took a look at the black sheep of the franchise. The one that people loathe and despise, and some even think it's maliciously sexist, but I'd like to share my perspective on it. This is my review of Metroid Other M for the Nintendo Wii. No sense in beating around the bush. The most controversial thing about the game by far is its writing. Other M is a sequel to Super Metroid, starting out with an impressively remade flashback of the Metroid infant giving its life to save Samus from Mother Brain and the resulting hyper beam that rips it to pieces. This is revealed to be a dream sequence, and after waking, Samus gets a training lesson from one of the most smug tutorial givers I've ever seen, and then she's off to business, tracking down a distress signal. This leads her to a bottle ship, where she runs into a Galactic Federation team that got there first, including her beloved commander, Adam. Now, my opinion of Adam actually isn't as bad as many others' is because I'm looking at it from the perspective of her not even being allowed to be there to begin with. Distress signal or not, it's technically Galactic Federation property, and Adam told her to get lost because, let's face it, his head gets on the chopping block if their mission goes wrong in any possible way. Yeah, it might seem a bit harsh for the great Adam to act so abrasive, but I honestly didn't think he was that bad since he ends up letting her stay anyway, at detriment to himself. Of course, this is after Samus already helped them twice, once getting past the front door and then helping them destroy a giant ooze monster, so yeah, might want to just let her stick around at that point. Of course, as per Metroid tradition, you don't start out with all of your equipment. Ordinarily, you'd have to refine it, but this game thought it would go with the super clever idea of Adam simply prohibiting all of her stuff until he approves of them one by one. Yes, it's poorly written, especially since Samus has several items related to defense and mobility that shouldn't have had any issues activating right off the bat. But whatever, I don't see a problem with this because it's just shoving in old Metroid mechanics anyway. Is it kinda stupid? Yeah, but they were clearly more interested in keeping that mechanic consistent than having it make any sense, and Samus magically losing her stuff never really made any sense in any of the Metroid games anyway, with the exception of Fusion. The lower-ranked soldiers along for the mission show some signs of their personality, but aside from Anthony, we don't really see enough of them to build up any meaningful attachment to, at least not in my opinion. If you're gonna make it so story-driven, some more time with them wouldn't have hurt, although Lyle getting so trigger-happy with a bug was kinda funny. Of course, he's the first one who gets killed, as it quickly becomes apparent that one of the crew members is a mole that's been ordered to kill them all. Now, along the way, there is an infamous moment where you have to trudge through heated areas, and only once you get to the boss does Adam tell her to activate the various suit, that upgrade that allows her to stave off intense heat, which would have come in handy the second she entered the heated area. Obviously, they only did this to create an imposed challenge, and it's missing from the movie mode entirely, so they clearly didn't put any thought into it. Oh, and by the way, movie mode, in case you didn't know, is basically the entire game's cutscenes with some gameplay footage interlaced between, just in case you wanted to skip all that nasty gameplay and just enjoy the story. Personally, I would have preferred the option to skip cutscenes from the start. You get it only after you beat the game. The infamous Ridley scene does look bad if you didn't see the manga and didn't realize that her flashing to a 4-year-old is basically a callback to when Ridley killed her parents in front of her when she was a child. Obviously, the scene was made for dramatic effect so that Samus would then rise from her fear and beat the crap out of Ridley. Yeah, it feels forced, and it seems weird for Samus to act like this after already having beaten Ridley before without skipping a beat. But I can understand what they were going for there, and Samus saved Anthony's ass earlier, so it's not like they were trying to make a damsel out of her. Now, sadly, the deleter plot doesn't really have a satisfying conclusion because the deleter, whom, spoilers, was James the entire time, is found dead. In a similar fashion, Samus finds Ridley dead later on, so it's a shame they take away the gratification of having killed him. Now then, perhaps the most infamous scene is when Adam shoots Samus. The explanation I thought of is that he shot her to keep her from shooting what he thought was an unkillable Metroid due to it showing no signs of aggression before then. Then it goes aggro on its own and he just panics and shoots it, and it just so happens to work. Someone pointed out to me that they probably did it so that it would be dramatic and look like Adam might be the deleter, which I can see, and not wanting Samus to be able to move so she can't stop Adam from fulfilling his big badass hero moment that we all knew was coming. After that, Samus kills the Queen Metroid, eventually running into Madeline and Melissa. The latter, as it turns out, is an android Mother Brain, who went rogue after the evil Federation tried to inhibit her thoughts because she dared to stand up to them, and you go, girl! Sorry, I couldn't resist. Ironically, people call the game sexist, but it seems to go out of its way to make the girl power kind of vibe, with the higher-ups in the Galactic Federation just being complete douchebags, killing Melissa and even giving Madeline and Samus crap until Anthony shows up out of nowhere and just kinda saves the day. Overall, I'd say the story is very mediocre and definitely does not hold up well in my opinion, even if you judge it on its own merits without taking other games of the series into account. What annoyed me most about the story, actually, is that they failed to bring up the Chozo at all. I know the emphasis was all on the Galactic Federation, but Samus talking about Adam being her father figure, but then not a word to those wise bird creatures who saved her, raised her up, and gave her some of their own DNA and power suit. Real grateful adopted daughter she is, isn't she? Also doesn't help that a lot of the plot elements from the bottle ship to Nightmare showing up randomly were all taken from Metroid Fusion, which retroactively makes her reactions to the Metroid project in Fusion seem kinda silly, since she apparently caught them doing the exact same thing immediately prior. Of course, the constant drone tone monologues don't help either, because Sakamoto didn't understand the difference in cultures and forced the English voice to have the same tone as the Japanese counterpart. The problem is that what sounds brave and strong in Japanese sounds dishonest and frankly dull in English. The game's story isn't the worst in the world, but it's definitely full of problems, and I can see how many people would take a hard line against it. Sakamoto was trying to make a dramatic, suspenseful piece without putting all that much thought into it, and it really shows that writing a dramatic story probably isn't his strong suit. Now for the part not as many people talk about, the gameplay. While less egregious than the plot, the gameplay is also full of a lot of problems. There's a spark of Metroid there, but in my opinion it falls short of a lot of key elements, and it gets in its own way a little too much. Let me pack it down. The game basically takes place in a pseudo side-scroller way with some 3D movement. Right off the bat, it's not the most intuitive way of controlling it, but it's compounded by Sakamoto insisting on a NES-style controller, basically reasoning that it forced developers in the past to be creative. Yeah, one problem there, Chief. Those were 2D side-scrollers. Moving around in 3D with a D-pad is pretty terrible, especially when you had an analog stick you could have used. From what I hear, Team Ninja wanted to use the nunchuck, but Sakamoto shot them down, which was a big mistake. Even more ridiculous is that you have to rotate the Wii mode to enter a stationary first-person view, and it's only here that you can fire missiles. It's especially bad when the game mandates it. Try doing that in intense combat and not disorientating yourself. Easier said than done, am I right? They should have either made it all side-scroller with the missiles available in that, or gone all the way and made it a first-person shooter and given it Metroid Prime 3S controls, which would have turned out a lot better. Beyond the awkward controls, the game is incredibly linear. The most linear I've seen in the entire series. Maybe I'm just spoiled by Super Metroid and Metroid Prime letting you explore at your own leisure, but it felt too straightforward for me. Another difference is that you no longer get health or ammo from dead enemies. Instead, you have to enter a concentrate mode so that Samus can, I guess, will her health and ammo back. For a game that obviously borrows so much from Metroid Fusion, having Samus' suit be through willpower seems a little silly since in Fusion she's unconscious and her suit is still on her. That's literally the premise of the intro, where they had to cut into her suit in an attempt to rescue her. Of course, there's also this dodging mechanic that sounds cool on paper, but in practice, it seems way too easy to abuse, so you can, for the most part, just keep mashing the D-pad so you can dance from danger as it's about to hit you. Another little annoyance is that the game will sometimes put you into a third-person over-the-shoulder camera view, retaining the annoyances of D-pad 3D walking with the added benefit of walking more slowly. Then there's the pixel hunts, and a lot of them just aren't very intuitive at all, like looking at some green blood that may as well be blended into the grass, especially considering it's at 480p. Now, I've done nothing but rip the game apart so far, but I feel I should mention the better aspects of it. Other than the controls and the janky modified mechanics, using her items for the most part feels pretty satisfying. I especially like how it handles the screw attack and space jump. It keeps you steady, but it doesn't increase your elevation, which kinda makes sense. Don't want you to break any of the game's boundaries in the bigger areas after all. I just really wish you could use the nunchuck with it. That would have made the controls much more solid if you ask me. Using a power bomb is pretty cool though. You just charge up the morph ball bomb like how you use a charged beam shot. It's only a shame that the game never bothered to tell you that your power bombs were enabled once you were inside the Queen Metroid's stomach, either making a trial and error or forcing you to look it up yourself. The gameplay is very flawed, but I actually think it holds up better than the story does, and at the end of the day, when it unlocks all the doors, I dare say it feels more like an actual Metroid game. Too bad it didn't keep that feeling all the way through, but hey, at least it ends with a cameo of a Super Metroid boss, Phantom, in addition to the tried and true escape sequence. No doubt, this is by far the game's strongest suit. Voice acting is hit and miss, especially with Samus, but graphically that's probably Metroid Other M's best thing about it. The character models look good enough for the era, and the environments look pretty damn lush. Of course, they're, quote, fake, unquote, environments because they're holograms, but it still shows off the Wii's ability to produce good-looking landscapes very well. Now, they may not hold up well up close, unlike Metroid Prime 3, but that's not how you're typically looking at the game, so it can be overlooked. They're meant for the more zoomed-out camera angle, and they tend to look very good on that front. I should probably take this time to mention that Ridley shows up in previous forms in some kind of killer furry creature in his infant form for whatever random reason. Doesn't exactly scream dragon, but it sort of reminds me of a chocobo, you know, just more deadly, so good on them. Of course, the adolescent form looks substantially more like Ridley, and even has Ridley's theme spliced into it in the QuickTime event where you have to fend him off, making it perhaps less surprising when you end up fighting him in adult form, if you guessed it was him, of course. Now, the game clearly often uses pre-rendered cutscenes a lot of the time to take the graphics beyond what the Wii is capable of, but it's not so drastically different that it looks too jarring. And there are times where you're in control of Samus and the character still managed to hold up pretty good for what it's worth. I kinda wish the voice acting was better, but that's clearly Sakamoto demanding the same tones for the Japanese version, and I hear Samus's voice acting is actually better in the Japanese original, so take that what you will. You can tell a lot of the game's focus was making the game's graphics look polished, and they did a good job on that front. Well done, Team Ninja. Now, most of the people who have opinions of this game most likely say it's a terrible game of epic proportions, but then you've got a few out there who defend the game very aggressively and are probably steaming at me for all the critiques against the game I've made. My verdict is that I don't hate the game. It would take a lot of effort for me to hate a game, even one based on my favorite series. The word I would use for other M is mediocre. Surprised? It's not the most terrible game in the world by far. It's certainly no Superman 64 or Atari 2600, and it has moments where I really got into it, to be honest. I cared enough to play through it until the end, even in moments where it frustrated the hell out of me. I don't think the game is sexist, far from it. I think Sakamoto was trying to make the tried and true overcome your fears and be a hero story. Even though it doesn't really make any sense for a seasoned veteran like Samus to be having this much self-doubt throughout the entire thing based on how far she's come. I could understand maybe if it was a prequel to the original Metroid and she was first starting out. I can see how people would say it's an affront to Samus's character, but honestly you don't see her character all that much anyway. She shows a little bit in Fusion and there's the manga, but how much do you guys know about Samus's personality throughout most of the series, other than that she wears a power suit and she blasts bad guys? I can appreciate the attempt to deepen the series, but perhaps Metroid isn't the right one to be a melodramatic piece, especially like this. Metroid, to me, is an exploratory action-adventure of isolation for the most part, which other M seems to go out of its way to defy, and the many awkward design decisions only add fuel to that tire fire. I would only recommend this game if you really want a melodramatic Metroid story and don't mind pixel hunts, awkward D-pad controls, and moments where the writing is pretty lazy. I'd probably compare it to Duke Nukem Forever. It's a fully functional game and you might even get some enjoyment out of its merits, but it just fails to live up to the series. Come to think of it, I feel the same way about GoldenEye Rogue Agent, but that's a story for another time. The overriding theme of Metroid Other M may be Mother, but it's also mediocre.